And we're back. Welcome to Music Matters 2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm. We're delighted you can join us. Please subscribe to us here on YouTube and hit that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. Like and share our videos on social media. And for our complete listing of 76 past episodes and all of our upcoming episodes, please visit our website at www.jasontram.net. And you can also join our mailing list there as well. We have a wonderful composer, Mr. Robert Cohen, award-winning and innovative composer. Welcome, Robert.
Hi, how are you?
It's like we just met again. It's great to see you, Bob.
Great to see you too.
So, what are you doing in the midst of all this this change in the COVID and the challenges? And what are you doing these days?
Well, as I said, I'm doing a lot of spackling and painting.
We're certainly home more than we've ever been, I'm sure. Usually we'd be traveling, and you'd be traveling to Europe and seeing your pieces premiered and all over the country.
I had seven concerts that got canceled in the spring.
Wow. Were some of them premieres?
Yes.
And what's it like to have a premiere canceled?
It hurts, but Our business has so much rejection in it that I've sort of gotten used to it by now.
Yeah, I've had a lot of singers, a lot of opera singers on the program, and they all talk about most of the job is how to deal constructively with rejection.
It's hard. I was talking to someone today about that letter you get in the mail that says there are so many talented people out there, and as soon as you see that, you know that you didn't win the contest.
On to the next one. That's why I say, you know what? There's always the next one. So, Bob, when did you know you wanted to be a professional musician?
Well, I started listening. Actually, when I really, the first time was when I was at Carnegie Hall when I was about 8 years old. My father took me to Carnegie Hall. And I was sitting up in the balcony, I remember the piece. It was the Kabalevsky, it was actually the United States premiere of the Kabalevsky Violin Concerto. And I remember sitting there, it was the first time I had been to a major concert. And I said, wow, that's really cool. I would love to do something like that.
And you certainly have. What was it like when you had your first piece premiered in Carnegie Hall?
I looked up and I remembered exactly where I was sitting. It was very exciting. It was a very moving moment because my father had passed, and I remember being with him, and he took me there.
That's those magical memories, and that place has housed magical memories since the 1890s.
Yeah, I know when you walk through the hall and you see the pictures of all the great musicians and Mahler and
certainly, you feel the presence of the greats when you perform there.
Yeah, it's really something else. I mean, when you stand on that stage and you realize, it was like when I was at the Musikverein in Austria, when you see all the statues of Beethoven and Mahler in the hallways. It's quite humbling.
I didn't get nervous on my Carnegie Hall debut until I got to the dressing room and I saw a picture of Dvorak and I saw Bernstein.
Those guys.
Like, oh no. But it's such a thrill to make music in special places like the Musikverein and Carnegie Hall, and it must be a thrill to see your music get performed all over you. But you've had a great couple of years.
Yeah, it's been really it's been pretty astounding. The focal point has been Alzheimer's stories, which interestingly enough, when we first wrote it, I sent it to my composition teacher, who, by the way, just turned 91 on December 14th. I still send every piece that I write to him for his approval. And I remember he said, wow, this is a really good piece. He said, but the subject matter, I think maybe you'll get 2 or 3 performances. Don't be disappointed if you don't get more than that. And as of this date, I think we've had 40 performances.
That's an amazing achievement for classical modern music.
Yeah.
I mean,
But,
it's really difficult to get re-performed once you get performed for the first time.
yeah, plus it's not an easy piece. And it requires substantial forces, at least, relative to what most choral groups have.
And what do you attribute its success to?
I think the subject matter. I think that Alzheimer's had such a profound effect on people, and there's so many people that have either family members, friends, or friends of family members that have this horrible disease, and they're truly affected by the piece because they could relate to it. I think you find almost 1 to 2 degrees of separation for almost every member of the choir. In fact, when it was done at Montclair State, one of the members of the choir, one of the students, had just lost her father at the age of 52 from early onset Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, it's a disease that affects so many families. And how did you come up with the idea to write this piece? Did the words come first? Did the concept come from you?
It was a commission, and I always tell us at performances when we have our pre-concert lecture that I had met with the Susquehanna Valley Chorale, had heard another piece that Herschel and I had done called Edison Invents, which is for performer and orchestra about the life and work of Thomas Edison. And so they were very intrigued by the theatricality of it, and they wanted to do something. But at the time, they didn't really have a clear idea or the funding. But they said, look, maybe we'll have you write a mass or something like that. And I was kind of like, yeah, a mass isn't my thing. I mean, when I think mass, I think Mozart, Beethoven. I don't have to compete. But they said, at the point, we really have no clear idea, but let's get back to you if something happens. In most cases, when you have these kind of conversations, nothing comes from them. Well, lo and behold, about 2 years later, I got a call. And Bill Payne said, well, I have some good news for you. He said, we have a sponsor. We have a member of the choir who is going to be funding most of the cost of a commission. But he has a very specific topic in mind. And I said, thinking, what kind of a topic could you have? And he says, well, the topic is Alzheimer's disease. And the first thing that went through my mind was, I should have done the mass.
That's great.
So.
And why did they choose that particular topic?
Because both his parents had died of Alzheimer's disease.
That makes sense.
In fact, I have pictures of them that I carry to every performance where I'm invited.
Wow!
Because that was the basis of the commission. He said that I'll commission the work, but I want the subject matter to be about Alzheimer's disease.
And it's interesting how compositions have always had those parameters. And was the text written first? Did you have they told you how long the piece was before you were to commission it?
No, we were pretty free. In fact,
we lose your sound there, Bob?
Not really.
Okay, there we go.
In fact, what's interesting is when I first contacted Herschel, because he was aware of the group, he had actually met with them and myself 2 years earlier. When I mentioned the topic, his first words were, "Run away." He said, "This is an impossible topic." He says, "First of all, I just could not do it justice. How do you take a topic like this, which has such profound meaning in terms of the people, the patients, what's going on in society, and give it some real credence?" But I kind of thought after our conversation, I said, that's the very reason to do it. Take a topic that nobody else might want to do because it provides a challenge. So eventually, I talked to him and he said, well, let me give it a shot. And his first idea was a great idea, brilliant idea, was to create a blog uh, with members of the chorale, and they would, on the blog stories of their experiences with Alzheimer's, either personally or friends that had it. And we got eventually about 80 stories. And out of the 80, we chose 18 that we focused on in the piece. And as far as the lyrics versus music, that's always a question everybody, asks, what comes first, the lyrics and music? I always say yes. Herschel is also a very fine composer, and I've also written lyrics. So we both have, awareness of each other's craft. So he would present me with some work, and then we kind of put it together and find an arc. Finding the entire arc for the piece is the most difficult thing. And he came up with some very interesting ideas in terms of how we could address it, because it's in 3 parts. The first part is a very clinical view of the disease, how many people have it, what the future is. He came with very, very lucky to find that the actual transcript of Dr. Alzheimer, which is with his first patient, the patient that had him actually, define this disease, was actually on the internet. And he used much of the actual text translated out of the German. And we also used the statistics. The first movement is called The Numbers, and it's, again, very clinical, very objective, I guess is the best word. The second movement, called The Stories, is where we actually use these stories and interwove them into the fabric of the movement. And one of the things that I think was a good advantage for us is that both of us had theater experience, both of us in musical theater, and Herschel in opera. He was the librettist for the opera Elmer Gantry. So we both viewed it not only as a concert piece, but as a theatrical piece. And that was very helpful, because what I tried to do is with these stories is, rather than them being sung, for example, if you're a soloist singing Messiah, you're basically part of the orchestra, you're part of the vocal thing. You're not playing a character, you're singing the text, but you're not playing, a first person. Whereas the way we said it is, each of the stories was told by the singers as if they were the characters. So, for example, there's a very funny episode with a Navy guy who keeps telling the same story over and over, which is one characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. And, I tried to give it some humor, because, of course, the subject was so dark that it would be very hard to sustain a dark subject like this over a half-hour period without some humor. And so we gave him kind of a theatrical, musical theater-esque classic moment, where I also quoted from a lot of Navy songs. I even throw in Popeye's theme and Gilligan's Island underneath there in various places.
Having met you, had lunch with you, Bob,
probably
you're someone who incorporates humor into your work.
It had to summarize everything, and it came from a story that was told to Herschel by a member of the choir.
Sorry, continue, Bob.
Yeah.
So, having met you, you seem to be really good about infusing humor and your personality into your music. Do you find that your personality gets into your music often?
Yeah, I think it does.
I think that's wonderful.
For those who know me who are listening, yes.
So continue with that story. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's all right. I mean, it's, the bottom line was that it was an amazing story from one of the chorus members who had gone to the hospital to see, I think, a relative, their father. And every time they saw them, they would sing something. And this time they didn't know what to sing. And the relative said, "Sing anything." And that became the basis for the text. And as it turns out, ironically, after the piece was written, several years after, it became very well known that music was the last thing that an Alzheimer's patient lost because it was deep in long memory. And so the fact that singing actually was a way to get through to these people was really coincidental, and yet in many ways a very profound coincidence.
Yeah, it's amazing how the brain seems to hold musical memory so deep. And whenever you see someone with suffering end stages Alzheimer's and someone sings to them, they instantly recognize it. That's one of the most powerful things I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, Herschel had not had any contact with Alzheimer's, but my had Alzheimer's. And I have to say that if I knew what I knew after we wrote this piece, I think we would have spent a lot more time with music, because my father was an amateur violinist.
What was your instrument when you were growing up?
Violin, actually.
Violin, okay.
I followed my father. He actually would play with a quartet at the 92nd Street Y, when he retired and moved to New York. So he was playing violin till very much before he passed.
The musical tie runs deep. So
yes. But he was a chemist in real life, which is what he wanted me to be. But I would have no part of that. It was, you know what it was really, and I guess for people out there that have had other careers, because I've gone through a whole bunch of careers. When I was in college, I was at Brown, and the first meeting we had with the head of the department, the head of the chemistry department, he asked this question. He asked, "What do you want to do with this?" And I realized I was very good at science. I was very good at math. But I'd never thought about what I really wanted to do with it. I was kind of like, I'm going to be good at it. I'll get into a college. I'll take chemistry. But it was like I had no future that I saw. Whereas with music, I always had something that I realized I wanted to do. I had a profound emotional connection with. I didn't have an emotional connection with chemistry.
Yeah, it's a very different calling when you decide to go into one of those careers. I was doing a recording today in the city, and I heard an arrangement I'd never heard of, a spiritual. It was really beautiful. And I said, "Who was the arranger?" to the singer afterwards, and she said, "Oh, he's a medical doctor who teaches at Johns Hopkins." I'm like, unbelievable. He teaches medicine, and he's writing beautiful choral arrangements at night.
Well, there seems to be a real relationship between mathematics and science in general and music. There are a number of people that I know that were scientists. And Einstein famously was a violinist.
And his brother was a very famous musicologist, too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing. Whenever I meet someone like you who's good at many different things and who's done many things, what is having a diverse career and a career with a lot of turns and twists? How does that aid you in bringing more to your music making?
Well, in some ways, everything's been growing on top of everything else. I mean, I'll do the quick survey of my life. Started writing music when I was about 14, decided it was more practical to be a chemist, went to undergraduate school. After a year, I switched into the music program, went to Queens College for graduate study, went to Columbia for further graduate study, dropped out of the program and taught for 5 years at Drew University. And then the recession of the late 70s hit. They laid most of the people off in the arts department. Nothing new, right?
Yes. Sounds familiar.
And at that time, I had kind of become disillusioned when I was at Columbia with where the direction music was going. And I became very attracted to theater. And interestingly enough, one of the most profound moments, I think, in my early life was going to see the actual performance on Broadway of West Side Story. And I remember just being blown away by the music, absolutely blown away by the music. So I had taken a job writing a score for a play at this small off Broadway theater in New York. And it just hit me that this is what I wanted to do. So for a number of years, I started working in the theater. I did settings of various Shakespeare plays. I started working on a couple of original musicals. I ended up in Canada working in the Manitoba Theatre Center. And then I came back and I tried to get a job that would pay, and there were none to be had. And my father, always the practical guy, said, "Son, it's time you got a real job." So I didn't know what to do, but a cousin of mine who was a brilliant, brilliant guy said, "Well, why don't you go? Computer people are looking for computer salespeople, right?" And I worked for a company. He worked for a company, so I took a job as a marketing person selling time-sharing software at a computer company. And after about a year and a half of that, I realized the corporate world was not my milieu. And at the time, I had met somebody who was sort of, he was a business guy. He had, MBA in business, but he didn't work well with companies. And at the time, I'd moved to Hoboken to live because it was inexpensive. And I said, "Gee, I think this is an up and coming place." So we both left the corporate world and we started buying and developing real estate. And did that for about 7 years. And then the crash of 1987 put that to rest. And I started doing some consulting. And finally, in the early 90s, I said, if I don't get back to writing, I'm never going to get back. And I started working on a musical with a young guy who's now gone on to, tremendous heights in the television business. And we wrote this show called Suburb, and it won a Richard Rodgers Award. And it was playing off Broadway in the spring of actually 2001. We had hoped to take it on a full run when 9/11 happened.
Oh, boy.
Coincidences, right? And that sort of killed that. And so for a couple of years, I sort of looking for projects to start, and I never found anything. And that's when I was at a concert at Montclair State University and ran into Bob Aldrich. And Bob Aldrich said, "Gee, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I've been writing for the theater for many years." He says, "Well, send me your stuff." So after hearing my stuff, he said, "Something, this is way more sophisticated than most theater music. Have you ever written anything for the concert hall?" I said, "Well, actually, I started as a concert composer." And he says, "Something? Go back to it. That's where you belong." And at the time, I said, "Well, where do I start?" He said, "Well, what have you been doing?" He said, "You've been setting text." He says, "Set a poem." Well, I didn't know what poem to set, but I did remember one poem from my English class at Brown, which was Peter Quince at Cavalier. So I said, "Let me set that." So I started looking at it, and then I realized that it was 2 years yet before it was out of copyright. So I tracked down, you'll love this story, I tracked down the estate of Wallace Stevens, and the guy who managed the estate was an attorney in Connecticut, and I contacted him, and he goes like, "Well, what do you want to do with this?" I said, "Well, I want to set it to music." He says, "What are you talking about, like a show or something?" No. I said, "It's like a choral piece, like concert music." And he goes, "Oh, concert music. So you don't really intend to make any money, do you?" And he gave me the rights for nothing.
That's great.
And here I am back doing what I started doing. And that was the beginning of my career, getting back into writing for the concert.
And it's amazing how you cite Bernstein as an influence.
Oh my
someone
God.
who loved, who didn't see a difference between concert, staged, opera, musical theater. He just kind of morphed from one to the other with such seamless ease.
Oh, major influence.
And I think the theater influence on your music makes it very special.
Well, one of the things is that, and you mentioned it, it's interesting. You mentioned humor. I use a lot of humor in my work. I would never wake up in the morning with a tune in my head or even an idea for a musical piece. I have to develop a story. I actually write to stories, even if it's an abstract story. I'll write to a story. I'll develop a character in my mind, and that gives me the guideline. It becomes like sort of a subconscious script. And so, in a sense, every piece I write is kind of a piece of musical theater, even if it's not for the stage. Like one of the pieces that I've written is called An Ant's World. And I became fascinated by ants. And when I was in Costa Rica, I saw all of these ants carry, they call leaf cutting ants. They're phenomenal. They go on for hundreds of yards with these leaves. They take the leaves, they bring it to the nest, and they go back. And so I was fascinated by ants. And so I wrote this piece for marimba. And I just created these stories, and each movement was a story. And I did a similar thing with Galapagos Islands, with the creatures from the Galapagos Islands. And that's the way I work. So, like, in a sense, Alzheimer's stories became a great vehicle because that's what I did. And that's what Herschel and I both did, is rely on character and story rather than purely abstract music.
And do you ever write your own lyrics, or do you always?
Yes, I do. I've written a number. I only do them out of pure desperation. I've been working for a number of years with a couple of, I really prefer to use living lyricists. And I've worked with two, one, an ex-friend of mine, not an ex, she's still a friend of mine, who lives in Vermont. I've set two of her poems, very beautiful poems. But I've done a lot of work with a gentleman that you know, Ronald Cadmus, Reverend Cadmus.
Shout out to Reverend Ronald Cadmus.
And he, I mean, it was one of those things again. I mean, sometimes serendipity. You know, I got an email. He had heard Alzheimer's stories. In fact, that's what led to it. And he said, you know, I heard your piece. I really love it. You know, would you be interested in reading some of my poetry? And you know. So many of the time, my daughter plays violin. You want to hear her play? Yeah, sure. Yeah, right. You know, send me the tape. He sends me this poem called God's Whisper. And I looked at it and I like flipped out. I said, I mean, it was like, I said, I could set this. And so we started working. We've been working together for, I think now 8 years. And we've done quite a number of pieces together. I really like working with living poets or doing things by well-known poets that are obscure poets. I found a wonderful poet who was from Kentucky who died in the early 20th century. He wrote primarily from 1850 to 1900, and nobody's heard of it. And you know, there's some wonderful stuff out there that's not Emily Dickinson or Wordsworth or, you know, the ones that almost everybody said.
Yeah, it's interesting. It must be very rewarding to. I know as a conductor, I love getting to look at new scores, and I love getting to work with living composers because I can say, why did you write it this way? What inspired you? What were you thinking that morning? I mean, just the feedback and the conversation is much better than if I was trying to ask Beethoven the same thing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is it's collaboration. And again, one of the reasons I became so enamored of the theater was the idea of collaboration. And I really believe that even today, a lot of people say, well, why do you give so much room to conductors and performers to perform your work? You don't give too many notes. And my feeling is that they're part of the collaboration. And I don't want to impose my vision on them, unless it's something that's of a technical nature, a wrong note, a tempo that's so far out. But I really enjoy what people will do with a piece of music, because unlike art, unlike a painting, for example, and I have a good friend who's a wonderful painter. I have many of his works here. Once it's done, it's done. He finishes a painting and that's it. The painting's done. He can look at it. He sees what it is. But as soon as I finish a piece of music, it doesn't exist except in my head or in a MIDI realization.
It must be fascinating to watch your pieces come alive and with different choirs in different countries, to see them performed on, let's say, YouTube. Or what's it like to see your creations come to life in so many different guises?
Oh, it's a very...
Could you repeat that last part again? We might have lost you for a second
Yeah,
there.
it's really, I mean, that's, I guess, I always say to people, it's the greatest gift that you can give a composer, to perform his work. Yeah.
Any places, the recordings you've seen that have been like some of the most inspirational? Some of the recording, maybe you couldn't be there live, but you've seen them maybe on recordings. You've heard the recordings.
One that was just done recently, the one in Berlin, of a setting of a poem by this old friend of mine, Nancy Byrne, who I knew from Hoboken. It's not an easy piece, and I was just blown away. The other one was "Stay in Time," which Youve performed.
It's a great piece of music.
Thank you.
It's so different and so challenging. It's and so rhythmically fun, and yeah, just a great piece of music.
Well, that's when I wrote the lyric. I did a SSAA version, a treble version, and I got this email rather, about a year ago from somebody who was a student at Northwestern University in the choral program, and he said, "I loved this performance of Stay in Time." I said, "Which one are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, there's this wonderful performance that was done in China." Well, I was never contacted by anybody in China, but he gave me the link, and it's this children's choir in Guangdong province, and I could not believe it. Not only did they did it as fast as I think I've ever heard it, but in English, and they choreographed the whole thing at the same time. And I was just sitting, my mouth was open. I know when I showed it to my wife, we both said they were like, you know. So there are moments like that, or, you know, when people respond to Alzheimer's stories, that is the greatest gift that I get. I've had people who've come up to me and actually said that hearing that piece has changed their life. And to me, I don't think there's anything that an artist can do that is greater than moving someone in that way.
Wow, it's very profound. Are you working on any new pieces now? Has COVID or the COVID what we've gone through the last 6 months, have you started writing any music directly related to COVID?
Nothing related to COVID. I did 2 choral settings, one called Footsteps of the Angels and the other one called A Prayer in Spring. But I'm working now on a piece for bassoon and piano. I just finished what may be the last movement, or it may be just the whole thing. I'm not sure. It's 5 minutes long. I just finished it a couple of days ago, called So You Think I'm Funny, because I like to write pieces with a little humor, obviously, but also everybody pokes fun at the bassoon as being the clown of the orchestra. So I thought I'd write for that. Plus, like the tuba piece I wrote, there are very few pieces for bassoon. So, you know, if you write a string quartet, my teacher used to say there's a pie chart. Divided in half, that's Beethoven. Divided in a quarter, that's Mozart, Haydn, Bartok, Debussy. By the time you're up to like what's left, it's a little narrow thing. But when it comes to bassoon and tuba, there's very little literature out there, very little repertoire. So I kind of think practically.
Did you have a commission for that piece, or did that just
no?
Oh wow!
You know, the tuba piece was interesting. I'd written it, I'd sent it to a couple of tuba players, didn't get a response, and I got a response from this guy in Australia, Tim Busby, and he loved it. And he says, "I have some comments." He said, "I'd like to give you some advice because you're obviously not a tuba player," and I wasn't. And so we worked together to iron out some of the technical issues, ranges and stuff. And he was so helpful. I said, "Look, let me dedicate it to you." And so I basically, you know, wrote the piece around his capabilities. And this was just performed live in Australia. He's the principal with the Melbourne Symphony. It's called Do Not Enter, which is another story piece. I have a funny story about that. And it was just done a few months ago, and the performance is off the chart. There's another one where I never knew a tuba player could play that well in my life. even people who have heard the performance, their mouth drops.
It's amazing what these virtuosos can do on any instrument, right? Especially the tuba.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Vaughan Williams Tuba Concerto. There's not enough great tuba repertoire.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple, double bass. I mean, they're instruments that, yeah. Right.
So have you written other pieces like that for solo instruments or for instrumental unconventional instrumental combinations? And how often do those spark your imagination?
Well, I've written a lot of percussion work. And I wrote one called, again, called The Mysterious Transformation of Johann B, which is 3 imaginary scenes of the life of Bach for clarinet and percussion instruments. And in fact, it won an award from this group in New York Composers Circle. And it made me a member. And I have to say, it's been a wonderful relationship. It's a group in New York that has about over 40 composers. We meet every month. We have salons, like we had one this past Sunday, and we give about 6 or 7 concerts a year. And it's a great opportunity to get some feedback in a very positive way. I know in some cases when you're working with other people in the creative arts, sometimes it can be, how can I want to? But this is a great group of very talented people, very helpful, and we do everybody's work at least once during the season.
What an exciting way to share ideas and to raise everyone's level.
Yeah, the story of Mysterious is that I took 3 scenes. One where he's looking over the coffin of the Duke who put him in prison. One where he's having problem writing at night. He's having writer's block, and he thinks he's got the idea, and then it evaporates, like often happens with most composers. And then the last movement, he comes back after a concert. He gets drunk and he starts playing on the organ, and then eventually falls off the bench.
I love it. It's a Bach fan fiction.
It's funny, really. I don't know why you're laughing.
I love the idea of fan fiction. I think that's really popular with the kids now. And I love the idea of musical fan fiction. How does Bach's style incorporate into those stories?
Yeah.
Do you actually quote Bach in the composition?
Yeah. I often throw in quotes. I did several woodwind quintets, one of which was just recorded by Sunderman Quartet a couple of years ago, and called Calder's Circus, which was inspired by Calder's circus sculptures. And I threw in a whole bunch of references. One I threw in like, because it has to do with clowns, I threw in the opening of Petrushka. So I can't help it. It's like, what's his name, Bach?
PDQ.
PDQ Bach, who I was on a program with, interestingly enough.
That must have been fun to be. Peter Schickley has been at that for a long time.
Yeah.
My favorite is his Christmas series, "Oh Little Town of Hackensack." We're from Jersey. It's funny.
Know the town and the piece well.
Well, it's interesting. So, what are some of the we've all been shut down. How do you think life's going to open back up again? What do you think's next step for composers, and what advice do you have for young people coming up in the field in this challenging time? Make sure we didn't lose you there. So, what are some of the challenges? What is the way you think? Yeah, sorry.
I think you have to take the and my wife says you're so negative all the time, but I think you have to really look at the glasses being half full, in that this will go away eventually. We'll be out there, and I think you have to not beat yourself up, because I'm a great beater upper. I guess I'm sure there are people out there who composers, some of whom will relate to this, and others might think, what the hell is he talking about? But if I hear someone else's music, my first reaction is, oh God, they're so much better than me. Or when I get to the second or third day of writing a new piece, I have no talent. I'm never going to finish this. The muse is gone. But I think you have to put that aside and find a way to get over that. And so it's the same thing with what's going on now.
It's a good point. And that idea of self-doubt is, for a lot of people, that stops people in their tracks, and it's probably people's biggest enemy. I would say one of the biggest enemies for creative artists.
Yeah. Well, part of the problem is let's face it.
We lost you for a second. Can you hear that thought again?
Part of the problem, I think, is that there's so many talented people out there. I mean, I always relate to a story to people where we were doing rehearsal. Actually, I wrote a piece for violin piano, and we were rehearsing in the catacombs of, the rehearsal rooms that go on ad infinitum. And I recall walking by a rehearsal room, and there was a pianist playing this incredible piece of music, and I was going, oh my God, this is like a child genius, right? Then I went to the next room, and I said, they weren't so good. I mean, the level of talent out there is just incredible, and so much has to do with luck, being in the right place, and really sticking to it, and trying to promote. I know a lot of composers have problems promoting themselves. I think you have to get over that. I think you have to figure that there's two aspects to your craft. One is writing, and one is marketing yourself. And this is a good time, by the way, that you have all these free time, which a lot of us do, to really consider how best to market yourself in the environment we have right now, and what the future environment may bring to us.
Certainly, I think things are definitely going to change moving forward. How do you see things changing in the composition and the choral field? And what do you think the next step might be?
I
think we lost you for a second there, Trey. So,
yeah, I think I don't see that much change in the choral field, because once the COVID is not an issue, I think it's going to be more profound in the instrumental area. Orchestras are, having serious financial problems. As we all know, it's hard to sell contemporary music. And when it comes to orchestras having financial issues, some of them tend to go back to the standard literature, or doing your Star Wars concert. So I think it's going to be more difficult for larger groups. I think smaller groups, I think it's going to actually get better, because so many independent musicians have not been able to perform. And you're going to find smaller groups dying to have opportunities to perform. But I think in terms of choirs, I don't think there's going to be that much of a change. I think luckily we'll go back to live performances.
Yeah, we're all waiting for that day that the virus gets tamped down, the vaccine comes out, and we start to knock those numbers down. That's fingers crossed, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, what's your perspective?
I think so, there's definitely I think that technology has become such an integral part of everything these days.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see as things slowly open up again, we're going to see that technology used more often. I think e-print is going to be a much bigger thing for ensembles and conductors and people using the iPad instead of sheet music. We're seeing that change drastically. I think e-print's going crazy.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, now I do everything by PDF, by e-print. You know, so I mean, I think that is definitely, and now a lot of people are just doing it on laptops.
Yeah, the iPads, and it's amazing to me how that's revolutionizing, that part of the industry. I'm always like, what if your battery runs out? I'm so, I've had my computer crash so many times. I'm just like,
well,
okay.
Music stands will be having charging stations built into them, so I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, there'll be something, but it's just interesting how I've talked to so many different people on this show, and we talked about how even music publishing companies they're in such difficult times right now because people aren't performing, so they're not buying as much music.
I just got not an email. I got a letter 2 days ago from a prominent one that's going into bankruptcy, and they published several of my works, and I'm not sure. How that's going to come out in the end.
Does someone else buy the rights to those pieces, or do you get them back? How does that work?
Well, at this point, they still control the copyright, so I guess it depends on whether they survive. And I'm not sure, what's going to happen,
These are every day is a question. I don't know what the answer to that is, but we're going to find out.
Yeah.
2020.
There's a lot of stuff that we're going to find out. Yeah.
We say 2020, the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. But I think there's a great thing going on. For example, everybody asked the question that you did at the beginning: do you write the music around, or do you use computer? And from my process, the computer's been a godsend because I like work like jigsaw puzzles. My process is that I have a day, first a couple of days, which could last more than a couple of days, where I'm trying to come up with ideas. Then I call the third day syndrome, where I trash everything, decide I can't write anymore. And then I finally get to a point where the piece, I may not know all the notes, I might not have the form totally there, but I have an idea where it's going. And at that point, I can go to the computer. And what's great about the computer is you can cut and paste. And also you have ways of doing things that in the past took more time. For example, the last movement of this bassoon piece I wrote, I do a lot of things with inversions and retrograde inversions and stuff. And in Finale, which I use, you have a plugin that lets you do that. And then you can just plug it in. You can see what it sounds like. You can change the instrumentation. So I think it's become a huge creative tool. Some people are, it's still better to sit down with a piece of paper at the piano. But for me, this has changed my whole compositional process. In fact, when I look at things I wrote on transparencies, I have a sense of dread. How did I do that? Yeah.
It's amazing how, it does. Technology is always changing our work. It's always changing our output. And you wonder if the composers like Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, if they had that, they certainly would have embraced it and used it in their writing. Look at how the advances from Mozart to Beethoven in the orchestral instruments, it were immediately incorporated.
Sure.
They immediately put the orchestration on what the horns could do, what the trumpets could do. Beethoven wanted to use 3 horns and then 4 horns in his symphonies, and he changed things around. Technology changes, we adapt.
A good friend of mine, Larry Hochman, who's an incredible talent. He's a big, huge Broadway orchestrator and composer. He always joked. He said, if Mozart were alive today, he'd be doing MIDI. Forget about it. He'd be sitting there with MIDI. He'd be like, you think I can write these many pieces? I'll write 3 times as many pieces.
Certainly would. They were as busy as they could be, and it's incredible. So, Do you have new what commissions are most upcoming? I know you must have some on the back burner. Are you pitching new ideas, or do you write music without? What percentage of your music is written with commission? What percent is just written?
Most of it I write because of my desire to write. Commissions have been rather slow as of late, which is not unusual. But I tend to write either where I see an opportunity or an idea that I think needs to be expressed. Like Ron and I wrote 3 pieces that were politically focused. One was inspired by the Pulse nightclub massacre. One was inspired by the shooting in Florida, Parkland shooting. And then we just finished a piece for Women's Chorus based on the suffrage movement. And then the piece that I also sent you a recording of, Stardate 101, which is one of the pieces I also did my own lyric for, is about the environment and what potentially awaits if we don't take the environment seriously. And I had a friend of mine has a friend who's an animator. She works for television, and she did absolutely incredible animation for me, which we put on YouTube. So that was really an exciting collaboration. But as all composers, I wish I had more commissions. Please send me your money.
whenever you write, I'm always impressed. When I've read most of your pieces that I've been given, and they're always so clever. It's always and getting to meet you and just talk to you, like, you're such a clever, interesting person. Your pieces are like, there are you, which is such a compliment. I think it's an incredible compliment.
Well, thank you. I always, as I said, I always beat myself up and say, I wish I sounded more like, and I'll name a lot of the names you know. But it's also, I'm sure that sometimes they do the same thing. They listen to someone else's, because we each write in a style that we feel comfortable with. My style is more quirky and humorous. Other people's style is more traditional, more like I call English choral style.
Or Brahmsian or something like that.
Right,
sure.
Right.
We have a question from the audience.
Sure.
Who are some of your favorite composers as you were growing up musically?
Oh, God. Well, forgetting about the big guys, Bernstein, that was what blew me away. Bartok, Shostakovich. I've heard the Fifth Symphony dozens of times, and yet when it gets to that section in the last movement where they go into the ba 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 da 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 da, it rocks my world. Prokofiev, contemporary, going back, Richard Strauss. I think the trio at the end of the Rosenkavalier is one of the greatest moments in music. But a lot of the American, I was really attracted to the American composers, Roy Harris, Copland. I really related to that style.
And that's a really eclectic group of people. So that it makes sense that your music is so eclectic and interesting and well-rounded.
It's really Sondheim that inspired me to go into the theater, because when I heard Company, I'd never heard Sondheim. And I went, oh my God, you can write theater music that's that sophisticated. And it's sort of sad that today, I think we've sort of gone backwards in musical theater. We've gone more to the kind of, the books are more sophisticated, but except for really unusual things, like what Lin-Manuel Miranda is doing, which is really unique, and he's really, truly a genius. Most musicals today are sort of by rote, and I miss that moment in Sondheim where you just sit there as a composer and you say, oh my God, that is like really serious work. It transcends musical theater and really gets into the realm of serious concert music that I think is going to live on, like any of the great composers.
I look at Sweeney Todd as being one of the
oh my God,
one of the high points of musical theater. It's just unbelievably complicated.
Yeah, but they're great, choral composers today. Dan Forrest, I love you. You interviewed him, Eric Essenwalds, Jake Runstead, and my own teacher, Ron Nelson. He was one of the ones that, I guess, when I think about it in college, the moment that I really knew I wanted to go into music was hearing one of his pieces for brass, percussion, and chorus, and just going, wow, that is so cool. I want to do that. Uh, and as I said, I send every piece I write to him for his approval. And sometimes, and he'll make comments. Sometimes it's like, it can have a downside as well.
Is he still writing music?
Yes, he is. Not a lot,
Wow.
but he's 91. He lives in Scottsdale, Arizona. Any other questions? Yeah.
I think it's wonderful. Who's also Alice Parker is still writing music.
That's
and she's
right.
Still around, and that's some generation of American choral artists we have left.
Well, look at Elliott Carter wrote till he was what, 103?
That's wonderful. You get to think back over a lifetime and to reflect on that. I think it's incredible.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I always
Bob,
joke
that
that the best thing that a composer can have is posthumous, because and then they want to do your work. Then they don't have to deal with the living composer.
Well, I'm sure that that's not going to be the case for you. People are
Right.
going to continue to find your work and be
Thank
inspired by it, and choirs all over are going to accept the challenges that your pieces are quite challenging often,
Yeah.
and to rise to those challenges. How can people find out more about your work and to listen to some of these pieces?
Well, they can go to my website, www.robertscohen.com. I have SoundCloud. Most of my works were on SoundCloud. One thing I've been doing, which you're probably aware of, is with some of the recent choral pieces that I wrote, since I'm looking realistically probably at least a year before they will be performed. I use the services of Matthew Curtis. Matt Curtis is this amazing vocalist who can sing anywhere from the bass up through soprano, and he, through multi-tracking, will do a rendition of the choral pieces. And it doesn't sound like a chorus, but it gives you at least an idea. And at least I find that gratifying, because at least I can hear what the voices sound like, and it gives me an idea. Like, well, maybe I'll say, gee, maybe that would sound better doing it another way. Whereas if you're waiting for a chorus to do it, a lot of people are involved. Where with Matthew, you have one person, and he does a great job. And I know a lot of people use him for rehearsal tracks. There's some people who they don't think it represents a good representation of the work. But for a composer, I think of it kind of as like MIDI. It's not exactly, what the work's going to sound like, but it gives you some idea. And that gives me a certain amount of satisfaction.
Every little bit helps, certainly, as you're putting it together.
Yeah.
And he's very talented. I've heard a couple of those recordings. Incredible.
I play this for people, and they go, you can't be kidding.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you for taking the time for joining us on Music Matters, and wish you the best, writing lots of new pieces as we come out of this. Your music will blossom and explode, and I look forward to doing some of your music soon.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters. And remember, subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. We have a R&B singer / rapper and actress from Los Angeles on the show tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Her name is Valentina Mami. That'll be different and unique. We're starting to do contemporary music as well as classical. And we hope that you can join us. Tomorrow's at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And remember, keep music alive. Good night.
This next piece that I'm going to almost finish out the concert with is a very special piece. It was written by an American composer by the name of Robert Cohen, who's hopefully watching his time 5 a.m. in the morning in New York. He wrote this piece for me. It's in 3 movements. It's entitled Do Not Enter. It has a little bit of everything for the tuba. The movements are marked Strange Wanderings, Midnight Walk, and Runaway has an exclamation point. I don't know if you noticed that. So hope you enjoy this. And again, thanks for watching. Do Not Enter.